Hi, welcome to the Intercode podcast. On our inaugural episode, we are thrilled to have Sanjib Kalita, chairman at Fintech Meetup. Sanjib has gone from being a chip designer at Intel to leading a marquee networking and conference event in the fintech space. Today, we learn about his story, his successes, and how they've been shaped by introductions, relationships, and networking. Welcome, Sanjib.
Hey, welcome, Sanjib. Welcome to the Intercode podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great, Pushkar. Thank you so much for having me on this.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is a pleasure and an honor to have you on, Sanjib. I know we've been going back and forth for a few weeks now with your busy schedule and travel. I'm super amazed that you could make some time today. And it is absolutely crucial. I know conference season in the fintech space is, almost a 12-month activity with Fintech Meetup being one of the anchor events.
It absolutely is. And I feel like working in events, you tend to age a little bit quicker because even though we finished our 2025 event in March, since then, my mind has been in 26 for the last several months.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just so you know, I've already registered. So I think we are good.
Okay. Wonderful.
I hope to see you there again. But coming back to the podcast, I know I discussed this with you. I briefly met you just so that everybody has an overview. We briefly met probably for the first time during the FinTech Meetup earlier this year. And when I looked at how far that whole conference has come, especially since COVID, right? Because I started sort of attending the meetup 21, 22. So it's been 2, 3 years for me now. And I noticed how involved you were in your single-minded approach towards networking, connecting the dots, bringing together people across the fintech industry together and see the magic happen. And I thought, there's nobody better than having Sanjib on a podcast to talk about networking. How do we manage that today? What are some of the key insights that we can derive from your career, your trajectory, and share it with everybody? So thank you for being here today.
Thank you once again for having me here. It was definitely great to meet you earlier this year at Fintech Meetup. And the other thing that I'd say is that, I obviously met a lot of people at the event, but I know that you followed up, that you were very understanding of time constraints and things like that. So it was actually like a pleasure to hear from you. And once again, it's like always great to talk to you.
Amazing. All right. So let's just jump in, right? Tell us the Sanjib Kalita story. And specifically, how did you get into, I know you have a varied background. Tell us how you got into this amazing career and tell us how you built it.
Sure. I think like a lot of the professional side of life gets shaped by the personal side of life as well too.
Yep.
And while growing up, I was born in India, immigrated to the US as a child, and then moved around a fair amount as an immigrant, and was constantly sort of the new person in the school system, trying to meet new friends, new people. And I think that sort of made me, just even from a very young age, just like used to like trying to meet people. And even when I moved on to other places, I think, especially as a child, think about when you were like 12, 13 and you're having to uproot yourself to a new school, then at that point, like talking to my friends from the place I left was actually like a source of comfort, a source of feeling like that the world hadn't completely changed. I think like fast forward, to my professional career, I started off as a chip designer at Intel, went on to business school where I worked at Citibank for 9 years. And then the last 15, 16 years or so, I've been working on, I'd say, the startup world or being an entrepreneur. Worked on an ed tech startup, then worked on a fintech startup that was acquired by Google, then left Google to build a fintech conference called Money 2020, which was also acquired, and then left Money 2020 to lead the fintech meetup, which I thought was like taking networking and events and using technology to make them that much better and more effective. So even on the professional level, I moved around a fair amount and had to meet new people. really called upon when I was a child, and once again, being the new kid on the block, it was, I'd say it was a good training ground for what I'm doing now.
Oh, that's amazing, Sanjib. I mean, look, this is how most of these successful careers are. You discover something that, you're not just passionate about, but also are good at, and then you build on top of that. One of the things we want to highlight and tease out as part of the podcast is, hey, no person is an island, right? To succeed, you either build the bridges or you get help to start the foundation to eventually build a bridge, right? So help us understand what were some of the connections or these relationships that led to your success.
I would say that one of the most important connections that I had was actually someone that I met at a conference.
Wow.
Yeah, I was.
So I can see where the passion about conferences comes from.
Yes, I'll go back maybe 25-ish years or so. When I was at Citibank, I was leading the Citi Cards efforts in looking at prepaid cards. Myself and my manager, we were invited to a conference by MasterCard about prepaid cards. There were several sessions and met a ton of people, but there's this one session in particular was like a panel with the CEOs of three prepaid card processors. So my boss and I sat through it, and there was one individual in particular, one of the CEOs, who was like just, I felt, head and shoulders above everybody else in terms of being able to express what's happening in the market, provide some insights as far as like where the market is heading. Just got a really sense of comfort from listening to him. And that was Anil Agarwal, who was at the time CEO of his first startup, Clarity Payments, which was acquired by TSYS. And so listening to Anil, like I said, I was like, I need to know this. He's really good. And I told the same thing to my boss. I was like, hey, we need to get to know this guy. And so we both introduced ourselves to him afterwards, not only finding potential people to meet, but also like how you respond. Like, so from Anil's perspective, my boss was there, who was more senior, probably, had more responsibility. But I'd say that, I think he could tell that I was like genuinely excited by hearing what he had to say, and genuinely interested in his thoughts on where the market was heading. And I think I showed a sense of energy. Like anything that he worked on, he's a serial entrepreneur. He's done a ton of things. Like, so anything, and he's told me like, try to get your thoughts on or get you involved in. And once again, that was not because I had a higher position. It was because I showed that energy, that genuine interest. I'd say that even if you're earlier in your career, that is so important to show. And don't assume that you will be ignored because you just got out of school or you aren't as more senior as the person that you're with. It's very important to show your best self.
Yeah, Sanjib, you actually hit on a great point. I did not think about this before. As an example, when I meet folks, and I think you pointed this out earlier, when I connected with you, I showed genuine interest, some
Yes.
empathy,
Yeah.
which allowed you to say, okay, hey, this individual means well, is showing interest. And that is something. So help me understand. Look, that is something that everybody can do.
Yeah.
But everybody shies away from, right?
Yeah.
How much interest is too much interest? How much is it sort of feigned interest? I've noticed that folks who are looking for roles or who are looking for sales leads may fake an interest for the time. I'm absolutely certain that the person you're approaching can see through it. Can you speak to that a little bit, right?
That's a great question. Let me preface my response with a statement that, like, we're all humans. We have good days and bad days. There's so much going on in each of our lives. And so at that point, where one meets the other, you don't know what happened before. There might be times where I'll meet someone who's like, on paper, at least, like the perfect person for me that can help me or I can help them. For example, like something happens in a negative way in their personal lives, then they might not be the most open. Or, there have been cases where I'm sure, you travel quite a bit for events too, right? So you've just taken a long flight. Maybe it's been delayed by a few hours and your mind is like totally fried. And then you meet someone. It's like, you can't, sometimes it's really hard just because someone doesn't necessarily respond to you right away at that moment. Like,
Mhm.
just be kind to kind to others and be empathetic, as you mentioned. I'd say that a lot of this is, being able to read a person. And when you are talking to someone, first of all, try to, obviously, like, if you have the ability to do homework and research, like, get a sense of, what that person might be like. So for example, there's some people that are, let's say, more introverted or more analytical. So if you're interacting with them, then you would need to talk about things in one way versus another. And let's take it out of the personality, like even within, like, let's say, fintech or financial services. Like, if I'm talking to a regulator or a central banker, that's a very different way that I will speak to them rather than to, like, a VC or to an entrepreneur. And this is also something that I give an advice to entrepreneurs. Like, so there was a friend of mine who's an entrepreneur looking to buy a bank, and he was meeting with some central bankers. And so I just sort of couched him and, like, this is how you might want to talk about risks. This is how you might want to talk about some of the things that you're doing. So knowing that going into that conversation is helpful. And like I said, then reading the room, if you will.
Yeah.
The topics that you cover is to try to find the commonality between who I'm meeting with and myself. Like, so for example, if someone says, "Oh," and this is a benefit of having moved around a fair amount. I've lived in Midwest, I've lived in West Coast, East Coast. If someone says, "Oh, I grew up in Chicago," and then I'm like, "Oh yeah, I miss the pizza there."
Yeah.
And I think it's, and to your point, like, as far as faking it, like, I I do, when I mention those examples, like, I do genuinely talk about things that I miss. Like, so for example, if someone, going back to the Chicago example, I'll talk about pizza, but I'm maybe less of a, let's say, Chicago Bears football fan, so I'm not going to mention that.
Yeah, I don't think anybody here is going to mention about the Bears, with all due respect. I mean, look at the Patriots. I mean, they are languishing now, so I don't bring them up anymore. But yeah, I mean, look, those are excellent points. One of the things you hit on is reading the room, definitely crucial. Finding commonality. I know even when we were talking about as a prep for the podcast, it's not just you're mentioning this. Based on everything I've heard you say, you actually truly believe that that is a foundational part of even initiating it or maintaining contacts and networks, right?
Yeah.
Finding that commonality, you have to have something that you can start to relate on and build that relationship on.
Yeah, I do believe that. Yes. Once again, maybe it's a bit of just my past experience. It's like, there are definitely transactional relationships that one has, but I found that the ones that can be truly transformative are the ones that where you have a bit of that shared history that you can call upon, that trust, willingness to share more with that person than others, or to help out that person. Our time is the ultimate limited resource. So it's like having a bit of being able to get more time or better time with people, I think, very critical. And like, if it's sort of, and like yourself, like, you could have had so many people, or you've had, there's so many people that you could potentially talk to about network, but I think even when we met in person, there was a sense of commonality there that helped us develop a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so thank you for highlighting that. So just going back to, the initial question that we asked earlier, right? So one of the things you mentioned was you found the right person, the common interest in Anil Agarwal, and that monumentally changed your perspective about, hey, how do, at least that was one person that you wanted to learn from and emulate in some format. One of the folks you mentioned you were heavily influenced by was Mike Moritz, right?
Yes.
I would love for you to share that
Yeah.
story. That was such an amazing story.
Yeah. Mike Moritz, was used to run Sequoia, and he was back then. And when I met him, this was maybe about 10 years ago, and he was speaking at a show I was running in Europe. And for the event, like, our internal team, they were like, we were obviously very excited that he was going to be speaking at the show. Internally, they would refer to him as, Sir Michael. and
That's funny.
in a very formal manner, which I personally found like I tend to be a little bit more informal, but I was like, okay, yeah, totally cool if he wants to, if he likes to be referred
Yeah,
to as
yeah,
sir.
yeah, yeah.
You know? And so then at the show, I had a chance to, when I first met him in person, I was like, hi, my name is Sanjib Kalita, Sir Michael, Mr. Moritz. How do you like to be referred to as? And he just laughs and he shakes my hand. And he says, "Just call me bro." I thought it was hilarious. And I didn't call him bro. I called him Mike. So,
That one story just, repeatedly. I mean, I've been on a few more podcast episodes, and for viewers, they'll be able to go back and refer to some of the other guests too. This seems to be a common theme about being humble, about being approachable. So the networking and even with yourself, one of the reasons why you are Sanjeev Kalita is not because you want to know people, but now you're at a point where a lot of people want to know you, right?
yes.
And you're approachable, you're humble, you get along, and then it sort of spurs the same type of reaction with anybody who's trying to talk to you. So I believe you do bring up a great point, that humility, that approachability is something that folks have to develop as well as they get into networking.
It's so important, as like even you and I, we both have like so many different streams of projects and things that we're doing.
Yep.
When you meet an individual, I think it's so important that you were there as yourself, as an
Correct.
individual, opposed to like I'm running this or I'm doing that. It's like you never know where things lead, or what conversations might become fruitful in the future.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. Absolutely. I mean, could not agree more. So just switching gears a little bit, sort of getting deep dive into networking. I know you've been in the industry for a fair bit. So in your opinion, networking, the way I look at it, typically has sort of three different, at least I look at it three different ways. One is just pure intros, then you actually network based on those intros, and then some of them become relationships, right? Where it's both people are somewhat invested, but you've been part of firms where you've done like literal networking, like chip design networking,
Mm.
but then you've also gone into sort of business development, sales, you've helped scale companies, you've been part of the industry. Could you share some what networking, relationship building type, insights into what is actually working in the industry, what works, what doesn't work when it comes to networking, relationship building, and so on and so forth?
I think part of it is being easily understandable.
Hmm.
So when you meet someone, for the first time, I'm not gonna necessarily talk about, let's say, differential equations
Yeah.
or solving LLM. We might get into those topics as the
Yeah.
conversation progresses, but it's really important that when you start off meeting someone that you're,
Mhm.
simple and easily understandable. A lot of us have, I guess, like if I were to meet you and you described yourself, based on
Yeah.
versus your professional background, I might relate to you in different ways. Even professionally, like if you talk about what you've done versus what you want to do,
Mhm.
those might elicit different internal responses for me. So it's like,
Yep.
I think like, just being able to start off with something that's like, gives you a little bit of, that's simple, and that also provides you like a nice jumping off point for further conversations.
Yeah.
I think that's very important.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Simplifying the message is a crucial point, which a lot of people miss. One of the things I have been guilty of is in the past, when I was a developer, I lovingly called myself as a code monkey for what it's worth. It was, I would always talk about these fairly sophisticated sounding things, which meant nothing to somebody who doesn't have that background.
Yeah.
And they would be sometimes be confused. Hey, what is it that you're trying to say? So 100% could not agree more. Simplifying the message is absolutely crucial. I would also tie this back to what you mentioned earlier, finding a common ground.
Yeah.
right? Finding that commonality was
Yeah.
crucial. Yeah, I mean, those are amazing things. Come back to our conversations on FinTech Meetup a couple of times now.
Yeah.
It almost seems like you remembered something about the way we interacted.
Yeah.
So talk to us about that, right? I mean, is that how does one become, for the lack of a better term, how does one become memorable when meeting people?
Yeah. I'd say that in terms of, being memorable, there's a bit of an intellectual element. There's also an emotional element. And like, so, going back to when we met, I
Mhm.
actually, I remembered like your genuineness came across to me, and like your
Yeah.
happiness. And I did remember that. So like when you reached out to me, digitally, I was like, okay, even though it's a bunch of stream of bits that I'm
Yeah.
reading, it's like I remembered the emotion that when I met you. So I think that was really great. From an intellectual perspective, I think that it's also like, I'll bring up another former mentor, or Muge Yuzuak, we used to work at Citi. He worked in like all these international businesses. When I first met her, I was in a rotation program, and she was like trying to pitch me what her group was doing and how it might be interesting. And she asked me something that like really stuck with me. She's like, "Do you do you tend to resonate more with something visually, verbally, or numerically?" I've really, even in since then, like with communication, I also try to read the person. Like, do I think that they're more of a numeric person, or a visual person, or anecdotal, a verbal person? And in general, like even interspersing a bit of each and seeing
Yeah.
where the conversation, like where does it get the most traction from? Just because I might appreciate, let's say, something visual, doesn't necessarily mean that you would. You might want to be more driven by the fact that we got a 47% increase in
Yeah.
response rate, versus like just me showing like a bigger pie or something like that, or a graph. It's like
Yeah.
definitely that's another trick to be, you know.
Yeah, I mean, look, Sanjib, that is so. First off, what you just said is amazing. Like visual, verbal, or numerical. Like you're spanning engineering, math, arts, businesses, and really distilling it down to an actionable criteria, right?
Mhm.
How do you relate to somebody? Visual, emotional, verbal, numerical. That's killer. That's
Yeah,
amazing. Thank you. That's
yeah.
so when you actually do meet people, I know in our case I was probably one of the 5,000 people you met that were high on coffee, admittedly. And then I reached out to you to create that sort of a personal relationship. But in your opinion, when you go out and when you want to meet somebody, how do you go from an intro to more of a networking slash relationships? How do you build those bridges?
I think like all of us, like we're meeting people who have who are meeting thousands of other people. And like, how do I, first of all, it's a bit of like establishing credibility. If we know anyone in common,
Mhm.
um and hopefully that person in common has a positive opinion of me, I might mention that person. It's like, oh, I heard a lot
Mm,
about you through Pushkar, and he's said some great things about you. um
great.
Another way of establishing credibility is just even talking about track records or brands or projects that person might have been familiar with. Then also, what my why I'm meeting that person, like that, just
Hmm.
being very clear. Actually, like another person that I've learned from quite a bit is, former roommate, and we were classmates in business school as well. But my friend Sai Coppola, who he's been in sort of the BD and sales side for quite a bit, selling technology, and he's worked on startups that were one startup that was acquired by Apple, another
Mhm.
startup that was acquired by Google, and he's worked at like some very interesting places. And he talked about like how I one time I remember when we were sitting in the living room, and I was like, hey, I don't think I'd ever be like a good salesperson, because like I'm just like very straightforward, like I don't have a
Yep.
poker face. So I was like, actually, no, that's actually very helpful when you're a salesperson, because then you're more trustworthy, and like you can sort of, if it doesn't work, that it's like, I think a lot of times, companies and people appreciate that. So I think like that's also made me more confident in like where in the past I might have been like, I have no business in this conversation. But this also made me feel like, okay, let me at least say what I think. And if it helps, it's great. If it doesn't, that's fine too.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, having establishing that credibility, I think, is crucial. This is something I know you've done. I mean, I'm just using our interaction as an example.
Yeah.
Definitely, both of us have done that to some extent.
Yeah.
Me more than you have. But it's important to also not come across as salesy.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that one of my sales mentors in that sense helped me with the exact same message. Don't try to sell. Just be very clear about the value you're providing, and then let the chips fall where they may. That
Yeah.
makes for a good person. You establish credibility not because you're trying to sell something, but you're being very clear about what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Your intentions are clear, and that's crucial. We talked about how the industry is working, right? The communication is key, simplifying the message. That works in fintech. In your opinion, do the same principles apply to most of the other industries as well? Or have you seen exceptions or industries where there's something cool going on that perhaps we are not aware of? And again, it's an open-ended question, but I
Yeah.
wasn't sure if I know because you've been exposed to so many industries. Would love to
Yeah.
see if there's something you've seen that is kind of unique.
Yeah. I'd say that just sort of going through the industry. So, for example, I've worked in education, in ed tech. I've worked in defense industry. I've also worked in healthcare and pharma, and as well as like just the general consumer tech as well too. So I'd say that like there are differences in industry, like in education. That's an industry where I think that there's a lot of it is very, very consensus driven. You need to build that consensus across like many different I'd say it's like, in the end you want to get to like better outcomes for students or whoever's being educated, but that waterfalls into very many different ways. Whereas I'd say like in financial services, obviously there's a heavier commercial element there. If you talked about like making more money or doing something that saves money or efficiency like that, I think it'll be easier to build that consensus around that. Whereas like let's say even like healthcare, that's another case where the key metrics that one is trying to get towards, can really vary depending on what function one is in. So it's I think in all of those industries, it's like, one, you need to bring across multiple functions. You need to bring across maybe multiple companies, and having that diversity of thought is helpful. So that is similar, but like as far as like the nuts and bolts of how things happen, they can vary quite a
Yeah,
bit.
yeah, absolutely. That's good to highlight because we are in a world, at least in the fintech space, we are in a world where, as you mentioned, it is very commercial heavy, right? It's very numbers heavy.
Yeah.
So our approach to networking is very different from what somebody in the education sector might be, as you mentioned, or the healthcare sector might be. That's great to highlight that.
One more quick thing on that
Yeah.
is like is like even where like financial services might intersect with some of these other industries, let's say retail. Like I know that when, for example, I was trying to work with retailers or pitch retailers, like I
Yeah.
knew that like, the time to talk to them was not in Q4, was not in, like when Black Friday is happening, not during the holiday season. It's like, so that there's definitely seasonality as far as like, and each of these industries has different seasonality, but like education as well. Like everything sort of, you have like maybe a couple of months of window, at the end of spring, beginning of summer, maybe, but then once fall hits, once again, like it's like educators are pretty much just focused on
And
that. Then like in financial services, once again, depending on what you're looking at, like say for example, if you are like working on tax software, obviously, it's like April 15th is like, once you get past that, then you might be more open to things. But it's like
correct.
each of these industries has different seasonality, different nuances that are important to think about when you're trying to network in that space.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's definitely crucial. Now, with that sort of experience, what do you think is more important today in networking versus, what you saw probably 10 years ago, 15 years ago. What does one need to do today to stay ahead in a fairly competitive and in some cases sort of a narrowing uh, job market, career market, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, I'd say that this is a long trend. Even going back to my, our parents' generation is like, our parents probably, once they got a job at someplace, that was
Yeah.
something that they were probably there for most of their career, if not all of their career. And then, then it got to a point where that was like less of the case, and you maybe change jobs every, maybe 2 or 3 times in your career. And now you change even more frequently than that. And then you get towards like things like gig economy and more like side hustles and things like that. So I think what that trend sort of says is that, like, let's say from a credibility standpoint, or from a personal, you might have personally tied yourself to a specific company,
Hmm.
20, 30 years ago. Whereas like now, obviously, the term personal branding is much more important, and how you present yourself on like digitally or on social media, I
Yep.
think is becomes more important. Like I said, in the past, you had a bit of the crutch of like, I worked at an Intel, I worked at a Citibank. Now it's like when I talk to people, it's more about the projects that I've done or the things I've built. How I think about myself has changed quite a bit since then. And obviously, like, the digital element is much more important now.
Hmm.
Even after we met in person, then, like messaging on LinkedIn or
Hmm.
sending emails, and also being able to tie back to, you referenced how we had met at Fintech Meetup. And that was helpful for me because, I meet so many people. So I think you helping put that into context was really helpful for me as
Yeah,
well.
that's great. I mean, having that tech enablement part of a regular routine is, I think, crucial. This is something that folks were not doing, I want to say 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about social media, but just being tech forward, as an example, is crucial.
Yes.
One of the other things that you referred to as we were talking earlier was traditionally folks who had a lot of information would sort of hold on to that, right? But now they
Mhm.
don't. Talk to us about how being tech forward or tech enabled has prevented that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's another great point. Like, I'd say like 15, 20 years ago, like being the gatekeeper for information, for even for contacts, was like
Mhm.
was 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 one way to develop one's own power or one's own
Mhm.
credibility, or raise one's profile. And whereas now it's sort of like, I do feel like it's much more a case where everything's out there. YouTube videos, with podcasts, with newsletters. I think it's like the actual element, that piece of information, that has some value, and you still get some cases of gatekeepers, but it's much less so. And I think that nowadays it's much more relevant and valuable to get one's perspective on that piece of
Hmm.
information. Things are changing so much. So like, if I were to talk to you, let's say, and you said that, oh, I don't believe in this or that because of this. Let's say, like, I fast forward like 6 months, and there's another scenario where another news bite is coming out that might be sort of similar. That might help me think. Let me call it Pushkar, and like, I thought he had some very interesting things to say when this
Yeah,
trend was happening, and what's happening with this. So it's like, so it's not necessarily being the gatekeeper to information, but it's a bit of like how one processes and synthesizes information, that I think is much more interesting nowadays.
absolutely. Yeah, I believe the words you were using were like bring perspectives,
Yeah.
not just knowledge, right? And
Yeah.
that is a lot of folks struggle to make that distinction because when we were brought up, I mean, I grew up in India as well. One of the big things was it was just the education system there forces you to be very knowledge heavy,
Mm,
but not necessarily develop your own perspective.
mm,
And that's a big learning where folks mistake knowledge for
mm.
intelligence, but that's not what matters. In networking, in meeting people, building relationships, perspectives, not just knowledge, is crucial.
Absolutely. And the perspectives are also things that, if I go back and look at, let's say I used to, save like some research reports, and I'll go into my old laptops and computers, and I'll see these reports, and like, oh man, at one point that was like, oh, I used to think this was so valuable. And
Yeah.
you go back to it and I'm like, okay, this is useless at this point,
Yeah.
But then if I look at, like, let's say maybe like how I looked at it, or put together a document that explained how I might evaluate various options, that stuff tends to have a lot more staying power, and still helps me actually think about things as even today.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Sanjib. That was amazing. A couple of things. You talked about tech enabled, or being tech enabled or tech forward, if you will. Folks have been using networking tools. I know there are some LinkedIn alternatives, some private groups. In your opinion, uh, in 2025, going on to 2026 soon, what helps people more, or what should people invest in, uh, and what hinders progress when it comes to networking, building, and maintaining relationships?
I think it's maybe bringing this back a bit, back to like Fintech Meetup, for example, and using technology. Like, let's say 15, 20 years ago, Fintech was not even a term that was used. And back then, we were just trying to create a community, and we could have some broad conversations, let's say, about like how mobile is going to be more important, or let's say like mobile payments, or you'll have the connected computer with you all over the place, and you could have these broad themes that were, like I said, that sort of got people together, were a bit of a unifying function. And now, fast forward, like I said, 15, 20 years, the industry is more mature. And like, if you are working on, let's say, like an open banking solution versus working on like let's say like a buy now, pay later, or some kind of a lending device, or if you're working on, an investment tool, or your digital bank,
Yeah.
like, the conversations are very different, and the knowledge, sometimes even like what you might say to one part of the ecosystem will, to get them on board, will turn off another part of the ecosystem. So it requires more targeted conversations, and so that's actually one of the reasons why I decided to join Fintech Meetup, was that I did feel like that the way that the industry was going, it required a new way to network, new way to converse with everyone. And like, I liked how, being able to, it's sort of like, when we first got email many years ago, getting an email was like a surprise, whereas now we literally get thousands of emails a day, and they're like, okay, what really matters? So I think like having technology as a way to figure out like what should I be paying attention to is also very important. And like, I think it's, and so like, even nowadays, like, going back to email, there might be, your email platform might say, hey, you sent this email out 3 days ago, do you want to follow up? Like, nudges like that are useful. And so I think that we're going to see more of that kind of stuff, as looking ahead.
That's great. I mean, you hit on events, you hit on sort of automations that people can put in onto their networking. I know a lot of people get spammed on LinkedIn. Have you thought, or at least in your opinion, do you think LinkedIn is still as valuable today? And if so, give us some thoughts around that. And
Yeah.
what are some of the alternatives to LinkedIn? And hint, hint, we're talking about the intro code, right? So what we're trying to do is effectively build a dedicated private network to help
Yeah.
people. But would love to get your thoughts on the usability, or the usefulness of LinkedIn, short term, long term, and some of the private groups and things like that.
Yeah, I think it's, I have like, my initial response is like, yeah, I do get spammed more on LinkedIn than much more than I used to. It's like, people will, it's sort of, I don't fault the platform. They make their money
Yeah.
from the stuff like this, but it's like,
Yeah.
it is, it has gone, I still see quite a bit of value in the platform, but it's also like, there's more of a filter that I need to put up than I need
Hmm.
to do even like a few years ago.
Yeah.
And I think that, to your point, that sort of makes like personal networks
Yeah.
that much more valuable. And, be it on a in person or digital like I really have a lot of fun, and like
Yeah.
sort of when someone I know puts together a dinner about a specific topic, and
Yeah.
we'll get a bunch of people together. I try to do that as well too. And digitally, similarly, like with what you're building, like that can be a great opportunity for developing a bit of like breaking through the clutter, hopefully developing something that's a bit more persistent and meaningful for the future.
Great. That's deep insight, Sanjib. Thank you. We touched on different types of introductions, what people should do, you know, do these intros, build these relationships. So now, hypothetically, folks have identified, hey, this is what we need to do to build a strong networking foundation. One of the questions people always ask is, hey, I built my network. How do I keep this network warm? How can I stop it, or how can I minimize it feeling very transactional?
I think that part of it is, and I was like talking. So like one of my friends from City, she's a great photographer, and like we're friends on Facebook, and so periodically she'll just post these amazing photos of nature scenes or mountains or lakes. It's like the places that she's been, and like I hadn't talked to her in a decent amount of time, so I called her. I was like, let's chat, and I was like, oh yeah, I love seeing your photos. And she's like, yeah, that's my hobby. That's what sort of keeps me, helps me feel, like I've got a
Yeah.
well-rounded life. Then like it sort of made me realize that like actually for me, like keeping up with friends is a way that is my hobby, if you will. So that's a bit of like how I personally, and it's also like that I get, nice positive energy from people that help me keep perspective on life, people that help me, measuring the milestones and guideposts of life, or sharing in news and things like that. So
Yeah.
it's it's sort of like that is one thing that I do, and like even just like if I have a moment of free time, that might be something like, hey, let me just ping someone, say hi, and so it's at this point, it's like I said, it's a bit of second nature. But
Yeah.
you can be more intentional with it. Like let's say like Friday afternoons, I have like schedule an hour of like just like keeping up with like who are the people that you want to genuinely reach out to and keep
Mhm.
in touch with. That's maybe one way of thinking about it.
That's great. Absolutely. In the same vein, right? When you decide when you want to spend your time on Friday afternoons to keep stuff warm, you share your hobbies. As an example, what I've started doing now is I do a lot of nonprofit work
Mm,
outside of my day job. So I've started sharing some of that in a professional level on LinkedIn.
yeah.
And if nothing else, but for the lack of a better term, to drive some eyeballs into it, say, hey, there is this other thing that I do, whether it's music or nonprofit, which is interesting. And I usually get, for every post I make, I usually get like between 3 to 5 messages from folks who are on my network that
Yeah.
either identify with something like that, or they say, hey, this is really cool. I had
Mm,
no idea you were doing this. And
yeah.
that becomes another pillar for us to sort of keep engaging.
Yeah, yeah. I, d- I think that that's a great point. Like in that case, you're sort of you're not afraid to show your
Mm,
multidimensionality, and
mm.
not different sides of yourself. And I think that
Yeah.
that's also very important.
Yeah, yeah. And this also ties back to what you mentioned earlier, right?
Yeah,
I'm not just bringing knowledge to the table. I'm
yeah,
bringing that perspective that, hey, I'm doing this because ABC, right? For
yeah,
example, I volunteer at this other place, and then I posted about, hey, why I decided to do it. And that helps add that context. So kind of sort of following your playbook, if you
yeah,
will, already. Okay, I know we are towards the end of the podcast.
yeah.
A couple of sort of closing reflections. First off, it's been great having you on. But what advice would you give somebody who doesn't want to feel salesy, or who doesn't want to feel transactional when building their network? I mean, folks that are probably just starting out their careers, right? So, for example, I was an engineer 25 years, 30 years ago,
Mm,
and what advice would you give yourself, for example, to prevent somebody from sounding salesy or transactional?
yeah. I would say that one of the very important things is a sense of listening. Like I think a lot of times what I've noticed is that when people come across as like sales, they're often just like feel like they're just like talking and not listening to me. And
Mm,
even if one is salesy, if they're listening to me, then I might be more open and more amenable to hearing what they have to say versus like if they're, so I think that that's, so if you are feeling salesy, like, one quick thing is like, make sure you're listening and then maybe try to restate or repeat back what you've heard from that person to make sure that, is this what you're saying? Pauses the conversation, changes the flow of the conversation, but also acknowledges that this is a conversation as opposed to like a monologue.
That is so cool. Conversation versus a monologue. Yeah, I think that one advice is absolutely key. Building that connection, having a conversation versus a one-way flow of information.
Yeah.
Spot on. Could not
Yeah.
have said that better.
Yes.
Good. Okay, so last thing, just a few rapid fire questions. On your first meeting, what do you prefer, coffee or lunch?
I'd say probably, my mind says coffee, my stomach says lunch. So it's a battle of,
Good one. Okay, fair enough.
who's leading who's in charge at that moment.
Understood. When somebody reaches out to you, do you prefer text, email, phone for introductions?
Definitely email, and I'd say email, then text, then phone. Like I hate random phone calls. It's like I don't pick
Okay.
up phone calls.
In terms of your networking, what has changed your sort of perspective on networking more, mentors or peers?
I would say probably peers. Like there was another conference I went to that said that like you are the average of the 5 person you spent the most amount of time with. And to me, that was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. And that's, who do you spend time with? That's something that I really try to think about too.
Amazing. Sanjib, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for answering those rapid fire questions.
Thank you, Pushkar.
I got some insights into how you think, whether it's the mind that's coffee or your stomach, and I'll know the next time I meet you. I need to catch you at like 11 a.m. to get this coffee done, I think.
Well, it's been a pleasure. And once again, thank you for reaching out about this, and really excited to see what you're doing next.
Absolutely. Thank you again. And thanks for being on the Integral podcast.